The sun hung low over the quiet neighborhood of Maple Ridge, casting golden rays across trimmed lawns and picket fences. It was June 12, 1981, a Friday like any other. Children laughed in the distance, sprinklers ticked rhythmically, and the Evans triplets, Luke, Lily, and Levi, were playing in their fenced backyard, their matching red tricycles scattered across the grass. They were 6 years old, curious, inseparable, always talking in their shared secret language only they fully understood. Their mother, Karen Evans, had just stepped inside the house for a few minutes. She needed to answer a phone call, something about her job at the library. She remembered vividly the sound of the screen door creaking shut behind her, the giggles of her children as they pretended to race each other, and the voice of little Lily shouting, "Last one to the tree is a rotten egg." It was a simple moment, normal, innocent. And then it was gone. Karen returned less than 10 minutes later, drying her hands on a dish towel. She pushed open the door and stepped into the backyard. The tricycles were still there. The gate was latched, but the yard was silent. Too silent. At first, she thought they were hiding, playing a game. She smiled, pretending to look behind the big oak tree and under the picnic table. "Okay, I give up," she called out. No reply. The smile faded from her lips. She checked the gate again, it was still shut. Panic slowly crept in, turning her movements frantic. She searched the entire property, then ran to the neighbors' yards. No one had seen anything. Within an hour, she was on the phone with the police, her voice trembling, trying to explain what didn't make sense. "There were 3 of them," she kept saying. "They were just here. They wouldn't have left without telling me." The police arrived quickly. At first, they believed it was a case of wandering children. A search party was organized. Officers, volunteers, and even a local K-9 unit scoured the area. Ditches, basements, attics, fields, they searched everywhere. Karen stayed up all night, pacing in circles, calling their names into the dark. By morning, there was still no sign of Luke, Lily, or Levi. Not a single footprint beyond the yard. Not a dropped toy. Not even a scream heard by the neighbors. Just 3 tricycles, abandoned and still facing the big oak tree. The mystery had begun. The sun rose the next morning over Maple Ridge, but it brought no relief. News of the missing Evans triplets spread like wildfire through the town. What had begun as a mysterious disappearance was quickly becoming a community crisis. By mid-morning, dozens of volunteers had gathered near the Evans home, neighbors, schoolteachers, friends, even strangers from nearby towns. People arrived with flashlights, maps, and a fierce determination to help. No one could believe that 3 children could vanish so completely in broad daylight. The police ramped up their efforts, setting up a command post at the edge of the Evans Street. Officers went door to door questioning residents, combing through backyards, and reviewing any surveillance footage, though in 1981, such footage was limited to a few stores downtown. Helicopters hovered overhead, scanning the surrounding woods. Search dogs were brought in again and again, but they lost the scent at the edge of the backyard, near the large oak tree, where the tricycles had last been seen. It was as if the children had simply evaporated. Karen remained at the center of it all, hollow-eyed and trembling. She refused to leave the backyard, convinced the triplets would return at any moment. She clutched their favorite blanket, whispering their names over and over like a prayer. She gave interviews to news crews with the same plea: if someone took them, please bring them home. Please. They're only 6. By the 3rd day, national news had picked up the story. Reporters gathered outside her home, their cameras flashing, their questions endless. Were there any threats? Was there anyone with a grudge? Did you see any suspicious vehicles? Karen tried to answer, but how could she explain that there had been nothing, no warning, no enemies, no noise? One moment they were there, and then they were gone. Speculation began to take root. Some suggested a stranger abduction, others whispered about someone from the family's past. A few even began to suspect Karen herself, though those closest to her defended her fiercely. The sheriff's office kept the case open but admitted to the press that they were baffled. No ransom note had been received. No witnesses had come forward. The triplets were just gone. The town changed overnight. Parents clutched their children tighter. Schools increased security. Windows were locked in broad daylight. And the Evans home, once filled with laughter and light, now stood as a symbol of fear and uncertainty. Weeks passed. Then months. Search parties dwindled, interest faded, and leads dried up. The posters, 3 smiling faces printed side by side, faded in the sun and peeled away in the wind. But Karen never stopped looking. Every missing child story in the news became another thread she chased. Every unfamiliar face in a crowd made her heart stop. In Maple Ridge, the name, Evans, became synonymous with sorrow. And in a small backyard beneath a giant oak tree, 3 empty tricycles sat untouched, rusting quietly in the summer heat. In the months that followed the disappearance of Luke, Lily, and Levi, the Evans household fell into a quiet decay. The once lively home, filled with the buzz of children's laughter and the soft chaos of toys underfoot, became a place of silence and shadows. Karen could no longer bear to move anything in the children's bedroom. Their beds remained made with their favorite cartoon sheets, their clothes still folded in the drawers. On the windowsill, a small toy dinosaur sun faded and dusty sat untouched, Luke's favorite. Each morning, she opened their curtains and whispered good morning to an empty room, hoping that one day they would walk back through the door and return to it all. Her husband, Mark, had tried in his own way to stay strong. In the beginning, he was there, taking phone calls from the police, organizing search volunteers, holding Karen when she broke down in the middle of the night. But grief gnawed at him differently. He became withdrawn, increasingly bitter. He couldn't understand why she still held on to hope when the rest of the world had begun to accept the worst. To him, the uncertainty was a cruelty he couldn't tolerate. Arguments flared between them, quiet at first, then louder. He accused her of living in denial, of refusing to move forward. She accused him of giving up on their children, of abandoning them while they might still be out there. The emotional divide grew until it could no longer be bridged. One morning, just over a year after the children disappeared, Mark packed a suitcase and left. There were no lawyers, no court filings, just the echo of the front door closing behind him, leaving Karen truly alone. She became something of a ghost herself in Maple Ridge. People crossed the street when they saw her coming. Not out of malice, but discomfort. She reminded them of something they couldn't fix, a grief that didn't fade with time. Friends who once brought meals stopped calling. Her siblings, who lived in another state, urged her to move on, to sell the house, to get therapy, to start over. But Karen refused. She couldn't leave the place where her children had last been seen, not when there were still unanswered questions. She began to document everything, every theory, every sighting, every strange dream she had. Her journals filled up rapidly, one after another, each page a mix of frantic handwriting, newspaper clippings, and printed emails from people claiming to have seen 3 children who looked like the Evans triplets. Most were false leads, cruel or misguided. But Karen kept them all, convinced that one thread might one day lead to the truth. Her life narrowed to a routine of remembrance. She cleaned the house daily as if the children might come home and be upset by the dust. She left 3 plates out at dinner. She baked their favorite cookies every Sunday. It became a ritual of devotion, a form of protest against forgetting. The neighbors began to call her the ghost mother, not to her face, but in whispers, their pity tinged with unease. What they didn't understand was that Karen wasn't stuck in the past, she was holding it open. Keeping it alive, like a lantern in the dark, just in case her children ever found their way back. She believed, with a fierce and aching certainty, that the story wasn't over. And so, even as her world fell apart around her, Karen remained steadfast in her vigil. Because sometimes, hope is all a mother has left. It was a late October afternoon in 2011 when Karen Evans decided, after years of avoiding it, to finally deal with the attic. The insulation was old and sagging, and with winter creeping in, a neighbor had warned her about heat loss. She didn't care much for the draft, it was the memories that made her hesitate. The attic was filled with decades of untouched belongings, most of them from before her life had crumbled. Boxes labeled in her late husband Mark's handwriting were scattered around, full of their old life, Christmas ornaments, baby clothes, faded photographs of vacations with 3 laughing children in matching outfits. She moved slowly through the dust and cobwebs, pulling one box at a time into the weak sunlight seeping through the small window. Then she found it, pushed far behind an old dresser, hidden under a stack of insulation boards. It was a plain brown box, smaller than the rest. No label. The cardboard was warped with time, its edges fraying. Something about it felt different. Karen's fingers trembled as she lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper, were several loose documents, a half-empty notepad with indecipherable scribbles, and a sealed envelope. Her breath caught. The envelope was addressed to her husband. In faded ink, it read simply, "Mark, destroy after reading." The handwriting was barely familiar. Not his. She turned it over in her hands for several long seconds, her pulse pounding in her ears. Then she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A letter. The writing was hurried, uneven, almost desperate. Karen read it once, then again, slower, the words sinking like stones in her chest. The letter mentioned June 1981. It referenced a deal, a cover-up, something about test subjects, and unauthorized exposure. And then, the line that made her knees give out beneath her: the children weren't supposed to be involved, but they saw too much. We had to act. I'm sorry. She sat there on the attic floor, the letter shaking in her hand, unable to breathe. What kind of deal? Who was we? Had Mark known something? Had he hidden this from her? The idea hit her like a thunderclap, not only that someone might have taken her children, but that her husband may have known, even if only in fragments, and said nothing. Had that been the real reason he left all those years ago? Karen spent hours going over the box. Most of the documents were meaningless or too vague to understand, numbers, partial addresses, abbreviations she couldn't decode. But the tone of the letter, the fear in it, was undeniable. It wasn't a hoax. It wasn't fantasy. Someone had written this in the days after her children disappeared, and her husband had kept it hidden. The house felt different when she came back down from the attic, colder, quieter. The silence had always been unbearable, but now it felt sinister. She placed the letter on her dining table and stared at it for hours, the light in the room fading until she was sitting in darkness. For the first time in decades, she felt something other than sorrow. She felt fire. A flicker of rage. The kind of anger that comes when you realize you may have been lied to, misled, manipulated. She no longer saw her children's disappearance as a random tragedy. It was beginning to look like something else entirely, planned, concealed, deliberate. Karen didn't know where to begin, but one thing was clear: she wasn't done searching. And now, she had a clue. Karen sat at her kitchen table late into the night, the mysterious letter unfolded in front of her, lit only by the flicker of a dim lamp. The phrases burned into her mind: test subjects, unauthorized exposure, the children weren't supposed to be involved. These weren't the ravings of a madman, they sounded calculated, like someone trying to confess without truly revealing everything. The address scribbled in the corner of the page was partially smudged, but it mentioned an industrial park and a number she could just barely make out. It was enough. The next morning, she made a call to a private investigator she'd read about in a local newspaper, someone who specialized in cold cases and had a reputation for digging deeper than most. The man's name was Roy Banner, a retired detective with sharp eyes and a blunt tone. When Karen showed him the letter, he didn't scoff or dismiss her. He read it carefully, asked a few questions, and then, without much fanfare, agreed to look into the address. Within days, he uncovered what she couldn't. The location was real. It had once been the site of a privately owned pharmaceutical testing facility called Harrow Creek Research Group. The company went bankrupt in the late 1980s after multiple lawsuits over unethical testing practices. Everything about the site had been buried, literally and legally. Karen and Roy drove out there together a week later. The site sat deep in the woods outside Maple Ridge, about 40 miles from Karen's home, a place she had never even known existed. The road was barely a road anymore, overgrown, rutted, with no signage to mark what had once stood there. When they arrived, the place was little more than a series of crumbling buildings hidden beneath a canopy of trees. Concrete structures with blackened windows, doors rusted shut, and ivy creeping over every surface. Despite its state of decay, there was an eerie stillness to it, as if the walls still held secrets. Karen's heart pounded as they pushed open the heavy metal door of the main structure. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and the smell of chemicals long dried. The floor was littered with broken glass, overturned filing cabinets, and water-damaged folders. They moved carefully, flashlights sweeping across peeling paint and graffiti. In the back of the facility, they found something that stopped them both cold: 3 small beds, metal framed and bolted to the ground. On each was a torn, child-sized mattress, stained and sagging. Nearby was a tiny bathroom, still intact, and shelves filled with medical containers too old to read clearly. It wasn't proof of anything, not yet, but it was wrong. A place like this should never have had children in it. Then, near the far wall, they discovered a steel cabinet locked shut with a rusted chain. Roy broke it open with a crowbar he kept in the trunk. Inside were documents, water-damaged but still partially legible. One file had 3 names blacked out with marker, and next to each was a date and the term, transferred. Another page mentioned a Project Echo. Karen didn't know what it meant, but the dread rising in her stomach told her it was connected. As they stood in that cold, lifeless room, Karen stared at the remnants of something monstrous and buried. Her instinct screamed that this was not just where the trail ended, but where it began. Something had happened here, something hidden from the world. And perhaps, just perhaps, her children had been a part of it. She didn't yet have the full picture, but she now held the edges of a terrible truth. She looked at Roy, her voice steady but low. "We keep going," she said. "No matter what we find." Karen's world, already tilted by grief and mystery, now spun in a new direction, one filled with dark truths and half-glimpsed horrors. The abandoned facility had confirmed her deepest fear. Her children had not simply vanished by chance. Something had been done to them. Something organized, deliberate. She began to pour every waking hour into uncovering what exactly Harrow Creek Research Group had been hiding. Roy Banner, the private investigator, remained by her side, and together they dug through newspaper archives, legal filings, medical journals, and old employee records, chasing a story that had been scrubbed clean from the public eye. They soon discovered that Harrow Creek had operated under several shell companies, one of which had briefly partnered with a military contractor in the late 1970s for cognitive and behavioral testing. Roy tracked down a former janitor who had worked at the facility back then, a man named Harold Griggs, now living quietly in a trailer park 3 states away. At first, Harold refused to speak. "I don't want trouble," he kept muttering. But when Karen placed a photo of the triplets on the table, Luke, Lily, and Levi, smiling in the sunshine, something in him cracked. "I remember those kids," he whispered. "I didn't know their names. Just that they weren't supposed to be there." Harold described seeing them once, through a hallway window, being led by adults in white coats. The children didn't look scared, just confused. He thought they were family members visiting. It wasn't until after the facility suddenly shut down in '82 that he realized something was off. Staff vanished without explanation, records were destroyed, and they were told to forget everything they'd seen. "That place, it did things to people," he said, eyes far away. "Tests, drugs, stuff they never explained to us janitors. But I saw a room with mirrors, on both sides. I saw kids being let in. And then I never saw them come back out." Karen was frozen. Her mind reeled at the implications. Had her children been experimented on? Used for some twisted scientific study? The very idea that they had been alive, confused, possibly hurt, and she had never known, it gutted her. But there was something else. Harold remembered a man, tall, with a birthmark on his cheek, who often arrived in a government-issued sedan. He referred to subjects by code names and once mentioned something about transferring them to Site 9. That name meant nothing to Karen or Roy, yet. But then, another breakthrough came unexpectedly. A former nurse who had been employed under one of Harrow Creek's subsidiaries anonymously mailed Karen a flash drive. No return address. On it was a single video file, grainy and warped with age, dated 1982. It showed a stark, fluorescent-lit room. A man in a lab coat entered with 3 small children, their backs to the camera. Karen's hand flew to her mouth. The boy in the middle had the same cowlick Luke always had. The girl on the left bounced slightly when she walked, just like Lily. And the smallest child trailed behind, head down, silent. Karen froze the video and stared at the still frame until her vision blurred. She was sure, it was them. It had to be. Even after all those years, a mother knows her children. The footage offered no sound, no answers. But it confirmed one thing: the triplets had lived past that fateful June afternoon. They hadn't been lost in the woods. They hadn't drowned or wandered off. They had been taken, used. And suddenly, a whole new nightmare unfolded. If they were alive in 1982, what had happened after? Were they still alive? Where were they now? What had Harrow Creek done to them? And what exactly was Project Echo? Karen's sorrow, long quieted into numbness, reignited into raw urgency. The question that haunted her every step now was no longer just, what happened? It was, can I still find them? She looked at Roy, her voice shaking but clear. I won't stop. Not until I know everything. Not until I bring them home. Karen hadn't slept properly in days. Every night, she sat in front of her laptop with the video of the children playing on a loop, staring at the pixelated frames until her eyes stung. The video wasn't just confirmation, it was fuel. Her children had been alive at least a year after they vanished, which meant everything the police had told her, everything the community had assumed, had been wrong. And now, with that flicker of truth, Karen couldn't rest. She couldn't eat. She couldn't think about anything else but the next step. The next breadcrumb. Roy, ever methodical, began investigating Site 9, the name Harold Griggs had mentioned. It took weeks of digging, but finally, they found a possible match in an obscure government document archived in a Freedom of Information Act database. Site 9 Inches had been a decommissioned facility located in the Utah desert, originally established during the Cold War as part of a classified psychological research program. It had since been absorbed into a web of federal agencies, repurposed, and renamed multiple times. Today, it was technically listed as abandoned and sealed due to radiological contamination. But aerial satellite images told a different story: recently disturbed ground, faint tire tracks, new fencing. Someone was still using the location. Karen knew what she had to do. They flew to Utah, driving through long stretches of desolate highway until they reached the outer perimeter of the alleged Site 9. The area was remote, surrounded by arid hills and desert brush. Nothing about it looked inviting. A rusted gate blocked the road, and a weathered sign read, "No trespassing, federal property." But it didn't deter Karen. She had come too far to stop now. They parked the car a half-mile away and hiked on foot, staying low, careful not to draw attention. As they neared the facility, they found remnants of old buildings, cinderblock walls, gutted structures, and piles of sandbags. But behind a tall ridge, hidden from view, was a section of the compound that looked far more intact. A perimeter fence with fresh wiring. Security cameras. A single building with no windows and a steel-reinforced door. Roy snapped photos. "Someone's here," he whispered. "This place isn't abandoned." Suddenly, a low hum filled the air, followed by the sound of approaching engines. Two black SUVs appeared from a dirt road, pulling up to the building's rear entrance. Men in tactical uniforms emerged, carrying equipment cases and entering swiftly through a keypad-secured door. Karen and Roy ducked behind a rock outcrop, watching in stunned silence. "We need to leave," Roy said, grabbing her arm. "This isn't just a dead case anymore. This is active, dangerous." But Karen couldn't move. Her heart thundered in her chest as a chilling thought crossed her mind. What if her children were still here? What if this was where they'd been all along? The mere idea that Luke, Lily, and Levi, now adults, could be inside that building ignited both hope and terror in her veins. They retreated carefully, blending back into the desert landscape, but Karen couldn't stop shaking. She had stared into the heart of something vast, something carefully hidden for decades. This wasn't just a corporate cover-up. It had federal fingerprints, scientific secrets, and a level of security that screamed of classified operations. That night, back at their motel, Karen broke down for the first time in months. Not out of grief, but because the truth was finally taking shape, and it was so much larger, more insidious, than she had ever imagined. She thought of her children not as they were in old photos, but as they might be now. Grown, changed, or worse. She didn't sleep. Instead, she wrote 3 letters. One for Luke, one for Lily, one for Levi. She told them she never stopped looking. That she always believed. That she was coming. Then she folded them and placed them in her bag, as if preparing for a reunion she could feel getting closer, even if she didn't yet know how. Whatever was waiting behind those walls, Karen was no longer the grieving mother lost in time. She was a hunter, a witness, and a mother on a mission. And nothing, government, secrets, fear, was going to stop her now. The sun rose slow and orange over the Utah desert, casting long shadows across the motel parking lot as Karen stared out the window, her mind racing. The events of the past months had hardened her, grief had long ago become a companion, but now it had evolved into something sharper, more focused. She had answers, pieces of a terrible puzzle, and now all that remained was the final act. Somewhere inside that fortified building near Site 9 were the remnants of what had happened to her children. Possibly, even the children themselves. The triplets, if they had survived whatever experiments had been done, would now be adults. Adults who had been shaped by things no child should have endured. Roy had gone quiet that morning, sifting through the photos they'd taken of the site the day before. "This isn't something we can storm," he said finally. "We're dealing with people who know how to disappear the truth. If we push too hard, they'll erase the last pieces." Karen nodded slowly. But something had shifted. That mother's instinct inside her, that strange sense she'd learned to trust over the years, was pulsing again. Urging her to act, to move, that if she hesitated now, the door might shut forever. That's when the knock came at the motel door. Roy's hand was immediately at his belt where he kept his concealed carry permit weapon. Karen stepped back instinctively. But it wasn't law enforcement or some shadowy agent. It was a woman, mid-30s, wearing simple clothes and a baseball cap. Her eyes were familiar in a way that stopped Karen's breath. Hazel. Sharp. Haunted. "I think you're my mother," she said. Karen blinked. Her mind stuttered. The woman slowly removed the cap, revealing a scar along her temple. "I don't have a name," she said softly. "But they used to call me Subject L2. I've seen your face before. In dreams. And once, in a photograph. I think I'm Lily." The air left Karen's lungs. Her knees buckled slightly, and Roy caught her by the elbow. Lily, the smallest of the triplets, the one who had always been quiet and curious, stood before her, flesh and blood, older, weathered, but real. She moved cautiously, as if she herself didn't fully believe this moment. Karen reached out a trembling hand. Lily took it. Tears came fast, uncontrollable. They clung to each other, mother and daughter, for long minutes, the years of loss and silence crashing down around them. Eventually, Lily pulled back. "There's more," she said. "They separated us years ago. Luke is alive, I'm sure of it. But Levi, I don't know. He was always different. He started changing when we were little. They said he had abilities." Karen's stomach twisted. "They moved us often," Lily continued. "Trained us. Watched us. They didn't call it a prison, but that's what it was. I escaped 6 years ago. Been hiding ever since. Watching. I didn't know how to find you until now. But something told me you'd come." Roy stared in disbelief, already scanning the parking lot for signs of being followed. Karen pulled herself together. "Then we go back," she said. "We find Luke. We find out what happened to Levi." Lily nodded, her face calm despite everything. "You're not done yet. None of us are." They didn't wait. They packed, cleared the motel room, and headed back toward the facility. This time, they weren't just searching for answers. They were coming to reclaim something long lost, something stolen. Karen had once thought the worst thing in the world was losing her children. Now she knew it was almost losing them, and never knowing they were still out there, waiting. The final truth lay ahead, hidden in steel walls, government lies, and a lifetime of silence. But this time, she wasn't alone. This time, she had a daughter by her side. And nothing was going to stop them.